Broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good evening. This week and next week we're going to be discussing a very important topic concerning stress and tension in the human race. In program number 1, part 1, we will study the causes of stress and tension and the effects that may have upon the human body. In part 2, next Saturday evening, we will discuss what one can do to try to eliminate or reduce certain amounts of stress or tension, or how to cope with that. In order to accomplish this discussion, we wish to welcome to our program Barbie Eide, who has been a counselor and teacher for the past 15 years. She presently conducts programs for Washington State Community College District 17, the YMCA, and the YWCA. She has also given her professional services to organizations and corporations throughout the Pacific Northwest. As to further background, she attended San Francisco City College and received much of her education at that institution. She is also a proponent of the time management methods that are used by Alan Lakin in his book entitled How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life. She is a member of the Spokane Chamber of Commerce, the American Society for Training and Development and Action Women's Exchange. She also serves on the board of directors of City College and the Eastern Washington Health Systems Agency Wellness Task Force. Barbie, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here.
Joining with me in questioning our guest this evening and again next week will be Mary Lou Reed, Joe Weld, and Janelle Berg. Lou Reed will ask the first series of questions.
Barbie, would you give us your own personal definition of stress? What does stress include to you?
Well, stress to me is the level of tension that we have in our body, Lou, and kind of, since you're asking me for a personal example, the way that I think about it for myself and to remember the level that I should have in my body is I think of my watch, not to become time conscious, but I think about the springs in my watch and how important it is that they are wound to the correct tension. For instance, if they're not wound tightly enough, the watch won't keep time. But if they're wound too tightly, the springs will snap and it will be an ineffective timepiece also. So the key is to wind it to just the right level of tension. And that's what I need to find in myself, just the level that's right for me.
Would you talk about some of the tools that you use in helping other people find these levels of tension within their own bodies? You had a test that you gave to the students at North Idaho College this afternoon.
Right. We had some great insights into our life by taking the Life Event Stress Quiz, Lou. This was developed by two doctors from our own University of Washington Medical School, Dr. Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray. And they actually have studied people around the world. They used to be in the Navy. And they found several events that cause stress in people's lives. Actually, what they found is that it's change that causes stress in our life. And the change can be happy or unhappy. It can be expected or unexpected. For instance, one of the events here on the quiz is pregnancy. And we know that that can be a positive or negative experience depending on the individuals involved. And it can be expected or unexpected. And what they've done is they've found 43 events in life that they feel cause change and cause stress, and they've given them a numerical value according to how stressful they are. Dr. Holmes and Ray feel that your total score within a 12-month period can tell some interesting things about what might happen to your body. I don't know, would you like to mention some of the events?
I think it would be very helpful if you chose maybe 3 or 4 of the important ones, the ones that seem to be most significant, and those that happen all the time but perhaps are less significant. If you could just give a little range, I think that's very revealing.
Okay. Well, the most stressful event on the quiz is death of a spouse, and that's 100 points. The least stressful is a minor violation of the law, such as a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. That's only 11 points. But some other common events here that can occur in our lives are divorce, 73 points. Getting married is 50 points. A change in your financial status, in other words, if it kind of fluctuates from month to month rather than you having a steady set income, is 38 points. Moving, changing residence, 20 points. Taking out a mortgage or loan over $10,000. If you've bought a house in the last year, this probably applies. 31 points. And, here's a couple. A vacation is 13 points. You know, a vacation, a lot of people wonder what's so stressful about that, and I think, again, it's because we have associated a negative connotation to stress, and we don't realize that it isn't necessarily negative unless it's in too high of a level in our body. There are two things that change when we go on a vacation, though, two changes that occur. Among many, our sleeping and our eating habits.
I'm sure the other members of the panel are going to want to follow up on this, but let me just toss in one other question, which has to do with the emphasis on change. Is it not true that routine and habit and lack of change can also produce stress, so that the vacation is actually an escape from the normal stress of the everyday, workaday world? I'm really glad that you brought that up, Lou, because some people feel that the idea is to eliminate all stress from our life, and that's not the key. There is a bird some of you may remember having heard of called the great auk, A-U-K, and it was first discovered in about 1758 in the Arctic Circle by explorers. And the great auk was a very interesting bird. First of all, where it lived in the Arctic Circle, it had no natural enemies. Secondly, fish were overabundant, so basically it just kind of had to waddle to the edge of the water and dip its beak down and pick out the fish, and there was its food. And basically had no stress in its life, in its environment. And as more and more explorers came into the area, here they found a source of fresh meat. Many had been traveling for months just eating salt pork. And 80 years after the great auk was first discovered, it became extinct. And basically, because it had lost the use of its wings, it had no need to fly, and it couldn't escape from man, the predator. And so while a vacation can be very relaxing and we need these pauses that refresh in our life, we want to be careful that we don't try to make our life too stress-free and not have any tension in the spring at all, or we can become ineffective also. Did I sort of answer what you were? Yes, very nicely. Thanks.
Barbara, I think before we move on to the panel, it's also important while we're on the exam for you to briefly mention the total scores if someone was taking this exam, what the University of Washington found out concerning indication of possible illness.
Well, Tony, the idea on this is kind of thinking of our life for the past 12 months. And if you have a less than 150 on your scale, you have only a 37% chance of becoming ill during the next year. If you have a score of 200, 150 to 200, you have raises the odds to 51%. And if you have a score of over 300, it means you have an 80% chance of becoming seriously ill during the next year. And so that's something we kind of want to keep track of, make sure our level isn't getting too high. Of course, you know, I might be able to tolerate a higher score, or you might be able to tolerate a higher score than someone else, depending on how much change you've experienced in your life in general.
Joe Webb.
That's the point I was going to ask you about, Barbie, and that is that all of our lifestyles are so different, and perhaps over a period of years, for example, I may have been living year after year with uncertainty as to my monthly income, being self-employed at one time, whereas someone else has always had a job and knew in advance for a whole year or two. And yet certainly I wouldn't have retained the same resulting bad results from that stress if I had learned to live with it, would I?
No, we do have, each of us has a different tolerance for stress, and that's why probably we want to be a little bit flexible about how we interpret this stress score. For instance, my score for the last 12 months or so is 858, and I suppose it could mean some pretty dramatic changes in my body happening, and yet I haven't even had a cold in the last year. And I don't feel I will become ill because there are positive things that I do to cope with stress. However, I'm sure I can tolerate a higher score than, say, a woman my age who's lived in Washtenaw all her life and maybe only taken 1 or 2 trips to Portland or something like that. And that's kind of been the circumference and sphere of her movement and change. Her family life has remained level. In this last year, she's gotten a divorce. It might be more stressful to her to have 73 points than 858 to me. I've had a life of a lot of change, a great deal of change, so I think I have a higher tolerance for stress.
Would you then recommend that people not avoid stress absolutely? In other words, that perhaps there are people who do not have enough stress in their lives so that when some small thing comes along they are less able to cope? How would you counsel someone whose life seemed a little too bland, so to speak?
Whether it seemed too bland or too exciting, what I would suggest is this, that you listen to the messages that your body is giving you. And you probably, if you have too little or too much stress in your life, your body is going to start giving you some signals, usually in the form of some psychosomatic illness. In fact, research has shown that 50 to 80% of all illnesses are psychosomatic. In the last Psychology Today, I think it's in the editorial section or in letters to the editor, it is mentioned that there is now a list of 178 illnesses that are believed to be psychosomatic or stress-related. Included among those are colds, flu, arthritis, diabetes. Alcoholism is a stress-related disease. Many forms of heart disease, colitis, skin disorders, many forms of cancer are now believed to be stress-related. This is what I would say. In the last year, if I had more than a cold or two, if I found some significant changes taking place in my body, I would seriously think about initiating any more changes. 858 might be my limit, and moving might just kind of put me close or over the edge. And I'd listen to those signals my body was giving me. I'd also watch for accidents in my life. If I was having more than 1 or 2 accidents, maybe that would be another way of dealing with it.
Janelle Berg.
We're just starting into the area that I want to ask you about, and that is, what are the signals that the body gives? How can we tell when we are getting too much stress or too much tension in our lives? What are the characteristics?
Some of the characteristics are the psychosomatic illnesses that we talked about. Some of the other things might be a tendency to abuse drugs or alcohol, to withdraw, maybe to take out our stress in negative ways on people we love or who are close to us by exploding, or even strangers. We stop to get gas put in our car and the attendant drips a little gas by the tank, and we just vent all our anger that's accumulated and our stress on him. And so those are just some of the things that we could start looking at.
About sleeping too much? Sleeping
too much or too little. However, this is another area that we need to determine our own needs in. Everyone does. One of the things I work with is the latest research in dreams and sleep. And at the community colleges in District 17 in Washington, I do seminars on dreams and sleep. And it's important that we find the amount of sleep time that is right for us. 8 hours is not right for everyone. It depends on what you're experiencing in your life. So If you're having a pretty restless night and you've got a lot of things on your mind, again, your body is telling you something. Or if you withdraw and sleep too much, again, that's another way of perhaps having too much stress.
You mentioned the dreams, and I'd like to follow up with that. What kinds of dreams are not average dreams?
Well, dreams basically are pictures of your feelings that you haven't expressed in the last day or two. And there's some methods that you can use to understand what those feelings are. What we try to do with dreams is not to analyze the dream with our thought and rational process, but to ask ourselves, how did that dream make me feel? And when have I felt that same way in the last day or two? And what is the dream telling me to do in my waking life? And so stress, usually most of our dreams have a stressful or a negative flavor to them because we pretty much express our positive feelings during the day. And that's a good way to get in touch with what the stress is in your life by asking yourself, what kind of stress feeling did I have in that dream, and when have I had that same feeling during the day, and how can I work on it? How can I release it?
How much does how we look have to do with the amount of stress that we feel?
You mean physically with our
Yes.
appearance?
Yes. Changes in physical appearance, perhaps, or even dealing with the way we look individually, like a change of, let's say, a change of hairstyle, or a change in our lives. How much does that have to do with stress and the balance?
Do you mean a change to kind of pick us up out of stress, or
It
when
might
we're
be.
being too stressed that we kind of let our appearance go, this kind of thing? I think that Janelle, would depend on the individual. I do a lot of programs and seminars for executive groups, and I have sat with a group of bankers, for instance, and you sort of, when you work with stress, you gain a sensitivity to people who might be more stressful than others just by certain mannerisms, some of their type A characteristics, type A behavior in your heart, the way they may rapidly speak or emphasize certain words or clip them off, and other nervous mannerisms, doing things like this with their pen or pencil and jiggling their foot. But I have seen these executives dressed perfectly, in their three-piece vested suit. And John Malloy, who wrote Dress for Success, would approve of their appearance in their dress. And so outwardly, their outward appearance may show a great sense of calm, confidence, and no change at all. Some of their nonverbal communication, though, might be a way one could tell.
Lou Reed.
Barbie, would you talk a little bit more about type A behavior and your heart? Because I think this is something that people tend to try not to accept if they do happen to be type A. Could you describe it and what some of the body types are that are most conducive to type A behavior?
It's a fascinating book that was written several years ago by two San Francisco cardiologists, Type A Behavior in Your Heart, Doctors Rosenman and Friedman. It's really fascinating how they discovered the Type A person. They were getting their office redecorated, and the interior decorator came in with suggestions and said, we'll do the walls this color, and I think this kind of lamp would really fit in with the decor, and the carpeting should be this. And he said, doctors, it's really a shame that you're going to have the chairs in your waiting room recovered, because they're the perfect color for the decoration that we're going to do. And they're like brand new, except they're worn out in one spot. And the doctor said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, come out here, I'll show you. And they went in the waiting room, and they looked at the chairs, and the chairs were worn out on the very front edge of the seat. So the doctors started to observe their patients, and they noticed that they literally sat on the edge of their seats. They had hurry sickness. And so they thought, if our patients have this personality characteristic in common, perhaps there are some others that we can determine and be more helpful in finding out what goes up into making the type of an individual that has a heart attack. And just to mention a few, you're either, according to the doctors, a type A or a type B, or that gray area in between, and I think most of us are in between. You're a type B if you exhibit none of the type A behavior. And some of the other things I talked about before, talking about how to recognize health danger signals and manage stress very successfully, finishing your sentences up quickly. Or when other people are talking and they pause for a minute, filling in the blank, you fill it in for them, Another thing is polyphasic activity or thinking. Right now while I'm talking to you, you're listening to me. I'm not suggesting you're doing this. But
I'm a good type A.
But that you might be listening to me and thinking of something else or another question you're going to ask me. And often we do this, but type A's do it the majority of the time.
And it is the time factor that is involved, right? They're trying to fill in more into the time.
Watching television and studying at the same time, and also polishing your toenails or whatever, driving the car and shaving or talking into the dictaphone. There's all sorts of...
And these are almost self-induced stress conditions, is that correct?
Well, they're habits that we get into. Type A's are very, very number-oriented. If they came to the popcorn forum, is that what it was called today? Rather, if somebody said, what was it like today, they would have said, well, it started at 2 minutes after 1, and there were, 203 people there. And what we did was we looked at 43 events, and my score was so-and-so. You see, they would have described things in terms of numbers, and they love to take tests. Type A's to say was, oh boy, I'm going to be measured. I'm going to have a score. I can hardly wait. They before I got up and talked, the tests were passed out ahead of time. Type A's already had their score figured out. You see, they were ready.
But the hazards of being a type A are that you may have an early heart attack and may not enjoy life as fully as possible. What advice do you have to people who may think that perhaps they're a little bit too time and quantitatives oriented and possibly type A's?
Well, one suggestion I've been seriously considering doing in the last week, be very difficult to do with the kind of work that I'm involved in. Having to be in certain places at certain times is not to wear a watch. Think you could do it?
On this program.
That's one of the suggestions the doctors have, to put your watch away and just to slow down. There's all kinds of positive ways that you can cope with stress. Would you like me to go into some of those now? Or
I think we may hold those until the next program, since we only have about 5 minutes left. Joe Webb.
I wanted to explore the problem of illness that's caused by tension further. Granted that tension is a factor in these illnesses, the illnesses indeed are real, and they must be treated medically. Is there any way that we can use our measurement of stress and perhaps the relief of some of the stress to help the illness? Has there any test been done on that? Or if an illness is incipient, removing stress before it actually exhibits itself?
Well, of course, the doctors who wrote Type A have developed a lot of techniques in their books, and they've used them with patients. There's some excellent, I don't know if I mentioned under psychosomatic illnesses, that many forms of cancer now are believed to be stress-related. And there's some wonderful work being done now by a Dr. Carl Symington in Texas. He used to be a radiologist at Travis Air Force Base. And he is using various forms of stress reduction techniques in working with patients, and I don't mean adults, I'm talking about even 4- and 5-year-olds, and they've had dramatic recoveries. You know what I sort of like to think about, and I think a technique, something that we could just use every day, is to remember that on the walls of the room that we call our mind, we have a thermometer and we have a thermostat. I think there's one over there on the wall. And every day when we get up, and many times throughout the day, we decide which of these devices we're going to use. Now, the thermometer really has no will of its own. It's manipulated by circumstances around it. If the temperature is warm, like it is in here from the lights, the mercury, oh my goodness, 108 degrees goes up. And if it's cold, the temperature goes down. It's controlled by the environment, but the thermostat is very, very different. It's set to what the temperature should be, and then it adjusts conditions accordingly. And this is probably an attitude that we should work more on having about life. Not to let the fact that we had snow yesterday and the roads are icy and we have to be somewhere allow our emotional mood to go up and down, and what people say and what's on the news. But to be a thermostat, to get up and decide what our level is going to be for the day, and to try to maintain what I teach in my meditation classes, that balance, that centered attitude where we move through life on a more level plane. And of course things are going to happen every once in a while where we're going to have a peak or a valley. But if we're going like that all the time, we're using up a tremendous amount of energy that some system of our body may not be able to afford to use. We're then using that energy and causing a stress on that weakest link in our body, and that's how the disease will develop, or the illness.
Janelle Bird.
Because this is going to be a two-part program, would you tell us some things that we might read before next week in order to know more, some books that you would recommend?
Okay. Well, I have here a book that I brought along. It's really for executives. It's called Executive Health by, I'm trying to see the author, Philip Goldberg. And it's a very comprehensive guide to successful stress management. Also, any books by Hans Selye on stress would also be good.
And you mentioned earlier How to Get Control, and you want to say the full name of the book and the author.
Yes, I use that in my time management courses. How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life by Alan Lakin. When we master our time, we master our life. Time is one of our most valuable resources, as I'm sure Tony's aware of right now.
Every day, I'm afraid. That brings us another question with the very short time we have left. I was wondering if you could tell us if you have any studies or any data that indicate that stress and tension in everyone's life is increasing in the 20th technological century compared with earlier in this century or in the past century. It seems that we all live such a fast-paced day each day. What data do you have on that?
I don't have any, specific data that I can quote, Tony, except in all of the books and any article on stress, which you alluded to, would be mentioned. We are living in a rapidly advancing technological society. In fact, I read the other day that 75% of all the information now available to mankind has been developed within the last 2 decades.
It is very significant, and I have to do that thing you've been talking about, interrupt, because the clock has caught us. I want to remind our viewers, however, that we will be with you again next Saturday at 6 o'clock to 6:30, when again our guest will be Barbie Eide, and we will talk at that time about what you can do about stress and tension. I believe today we've simply pointed out that it is a problem. We'll talk about how to cope with it next week. Please be with us at 6 o'clock. Until then, this is Tony Stewart. Good evening.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Last week we discussed causes of stress and the effects that it could have upon the human body. This week we want to deal with part 2 of that subject, and we wish to talk about how to cope with stress and particularly deal with body language and nonverbal communication. Our guest is returning this week to accomplish this goal. Our guest is Barbie Ide, who has been a counselor and teacher for the past 15 years. She presently conducts programs for the Washington State Community College District 17 and also the YMCA and the YWCA. Ms. Ide is a proponent of the time management methods used by Alan Lakey in his book entitled How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life. Mrs. Ide also attended San Francisco City College and has conducted a number of courses using most current research and scientific studies. She is a member of the Spokane Chamber of Commerce, the American Society for Training and Development and Action Women's Exchange. She serves on the board of directors of City College and the Eastern Washington Health Systems Agency Wellness Task Force. Barbie, welcome back for a continuation.
Super to be back again, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Joining with me this evening will be the same panel from last week, Mary Lou Reed, Joe Webb, and Janelle Berg. Mary Lou Reed will commence the questioning.
Barbie, stress management is a phrase that I was unfamiliar with. Would you tell us what stress management is?
Okay. Stress management is being aware of the level of tension in our body and whether it's too much or too little for our particular state of health. And if it's too much or too little and it's just not in the right balance, then using some techniques to bring it to the right level.
Let's start off with some of those techniques. I understand that you not only meditate, but you teach meditation. Why do you subscribe to this particular form of stress management?
Well, I have a list of 65 positive ways to cope with stress, and one of the ideas on that list is to create quiet time. Everybody needs time when he or she can be alone without any interference from any external stimulus. It's especially important for parents of small children. And one of the ways of creating that quiet time and one of the ways of really benefiting a great deal from it is meditation. To me, meditation is a way of feeling centered or balanced within. It's a time when I'm not thinking thoughts, balancing my checkbook or making out grocery lists or pondering what I'm going to be doing the next day. It's more of a feeling process. And it's very simple to learn. It's one of the classes that I do teach at the college and at the Y.
How about some of the other 65? Relaxation, is that something that you teach also?
Right. I think business people really find some of the relaxation techniques that we use very helpful. I have a technique, for instance, that takes about 3 or 4 minutes, and it's basically deals with the shoulder and neck muscles. And something that they can do it right at their desk, or even when they're waiting for a red light in traffic or kind of caught up in traffic, at least they can do part of it. And, rather than gripping the wheel and waiting for that light to change and kind of glaring at the other drivers, you can use that time constructively to relax your muscles and get a little bit more tranquil. So,
does this include breathing?
Yes, it does. One of the relaxation techniques that I do teach, Lou, is called progressive relaxation. It was developed in 1938 by a Dr. Herbert Jacobson. And it's basically beginning with your body in either direction, the head or the toes, and moving in the opposite direction, tensing and holding the tension in a muscle, and then completely releasing it and letting it go, but combining that with a breathing technique. Also in meditation, there are many, many ways to meditate, ways that are taught to meditate, to concentrate. And the way that I teach is to focus your attention on your breath. After a few minutes, you don't need to do that, but I use focusing on the breath as a concentration technique.
Thank you.
Joe Webb.
Barbie, does that tie in at all with some of the research that's been done by Hans Selye and Barbara Brown in discovering our bodily states and how they are related to the kind of brain waves that we're producing?
Right. When we're in a relaxed or a meditative state, our brain waves tend to be in a lower frequency, usually. Usually the faster your brain activity is, the faster or the more hertz cycles per second the brain waves show up on the electroencephalograph. And so probably right now most of us are in beta, which is, it's kind of going along like that on the electroencephalograph. And then the next brain waves, a little slower down the scale, are alpha, and then theta, and then delta. And somewhere in between alpha and theta is where meditation takes place. It's a very relaxed state of consciousness and not an analytical thought process. You were telling me you were going to have Barbara Brown here.
Yes, we are.
That's exciting, yeah.
Looking forward to it in March.
Oh, that's
Janelle
great.
Burke.
What are some positive ways that, in addition to the one that you've just indicated, that people can handle stress? And what are some not so positive ways, some negative ways of handling stress, so that we recognize those if that's the way we've been handling it?
Okay. Last week, I was mentioning some of the negative ways in line with another question we were talking about, but abusing alcohol and drugs, oversleeping, overeating, taking out our stress in temper tantrums or outbursts on people who are close to us or strangers. Some people take it out in their driving. Inefficiency in your work or lack of performance in your work, or just becoming so caught up and busy in your work that you don't notice the beautiful things that are happening around you. Those are some negative ways. Again, on this list of 65 positive ways that we have for coping with stress, there's all sorts of things. You can swim, you can bake bread. One thing I like to do is I like to run a bath of really warm water, kind of make it put all really special things in it, and climb in with the Reader's Digest and read all those neat anecdotes and stories. Seek humor, in other words. They lift my spirit. Just to read any kind of joke book is good. I think one good way is to own up to who we are. Very often we're trying to make the whole world love us. We're trying to live up to other people's expectations instead of our own. And we're pretty hard on ourselves. And if we would get to know ourselves and like ourselves better and not worry about what other people are thinking, that would reduce a lot of stress. Another very excellent way to cope with stress is to watch what we say. To think about what we've spoken during the day and to imagine a tape recording being made of what we've said. And if someone tape recorded your words, how would you appear to other people verbally? Are you positive or are you negative? Are you up on life or are you down on life? Sort of reminds me of the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. The optimist wakes up and says, "Good morning, God." And the pessimist gets up and says, "Good God, it's morning." You see? And it's sort of that attitude with our words. Now, what we say, other people pick up. It's cyclical. It comes back to us. They respond, again, to what we talked about last week, that thermometer or thermostat attitude toward life.
Barbie, something that you and I talked about on the telephone before you came was a very interesting statistic that 93% of all communication is nonverbal. I know you're a very great advocate of body language and nonverbal communication for dealing with other people, that also this is a way to deal with stress. One of the most impressive things that I think you've presented is the word soften and how those letters mean certain things concerning nonverbal communication. Would you take time to go over that and explain how people do deal with people in a nonverbal way?
Sure, and as I go along, if anyone has any questions or ideas, please feel free to add. Well, as you said, Tony, 93% of our communication is nonverbal. I do want to mention a couple of things in getting into this subject. Body language, the body language of a person is like a sentence, and we want to be careful not to take one gesture or a certain part of the posture out of context and try to evaluate the person according to that, any more than we take the word love or hate and try to give a meaning to it in a sentence, we would want to see what words came before and what words came after. Sort of with body language, sometimes a little information can be dangerous if we don't use it wisely. But also, the ideas I'll be sharing with you are kind of based on the latest research. And a lot of the things that you may be doing, that I may be doing, are things that are comfortable for us with our body. I know a man who has had varicose vein surgery on his legs when he was 5 and when he was 20. And there's a certain way he crosses his legs for comfort. And if you have read some of the popular books on body language, which I won't mention because I'm not going to plug them because I don't think they're that valid, you know, you might think certain negative things about this person unless you looked at the whole person. Body language, what we do with our bodies has a lot to do with the environment in this room. You know, if I wipe my forehead like this, you know, in a normal environment, it might mean, you know, I'm kind of worried or, you know, about something, or I'm trying to remember something. If I did it here and I'm really not feeling this way, it might be that I'm just feeling warm, you know, in the studio. The soften technique, it's the word soften. It's an acronym, and each letter stands for something in nonverbal communication, and it's a good way to remember these ideas. S is for smile, and it's important when we smile that we smile simple, we smile sincerely and pleasant. If we have a tensed, fixed smile on our face, you know, kind of, hi, it's a definite annoyance to other people. A good way to tell is if your face aches, you're smiling too hard. O stands for open posture. And open posture pretty much means having your coat unbuttoned and opened, your arms open and upturned, if possible, if comfortable, and your legs uncrossed. If you're seated at a table, try to keep your hands on top of the table and try to avoid putting your hands in your pockets. It may make people feel that you're concealing something or being secretive in some way. F stands for forward lean. And leaning just a bit forward can show your interest and your enthusiasm. Also we're in a different kind of a setup here, but also try to face the person that you're talking to, you know, rather than kind of sitting sideways and saying, well, I think I'll give you about half of my attention, you know, right now, rather than completely. So try to face the person that you're talking to. Do you have any comments or thoughts on just that part so far, the SOF part of the word soften?
I really would like to have you go on with the forward lean as you did with the students, in the fact that you can't lean too far, that the invasion of somebody else's space, I think you have to evidently be very sure that you're not intruding.
Right. We all pretty much set up our territory when we go into a room, when we sit at a table, and there are invisible lines, you know, right now on this particular area. And I suppose if, you know, during the day I'd kind of put my water glass there and move my watch there. Tony already is eyeing it nervously.
Yeah, push it back like that.
Yeah, right. We kind of get into a subconscious chess match. When we're eating with people, we want to be aware that other people have a territory and not to push things on their side of the table. Men especially can become aggressive and hostile when their territory is invaded. Another way, an experiment that you might want to do is the next time you go into a waiting room, when the next time you see your doctor or your dentist, and there's only a few people there and there's a lot of vacant chairs, sit right next to somebody instead of in one of the vacant chairs farther away. And they'll let you know how they feel about their space being invaded. They'll probably start fidgeting and crossing and uncrossing their arms and legs, probably begin to blink very rapidly, and within a short time they'll move. They'll probably go to the receptionist and verify their appointment, get a magazine, look out the window, go to the restroom, anything so they can come back and reestablish a territory where you aren't so close. But a good way to tell if you've invaded someone's territory when you're talking or when you're leaning forward is to watch. They may become rigid, pull back, put their arms across their chest, something like this.
What about the poor person who is nearsighted? He or she must be aware of this or get corrective glasses, because very often I've had people come too close and invade my territory, and I found out it's because they can't see.
Yes, it's really too bad that people don't realize sometimes about invading that territory and how other people feel. You know that feeling when someone's been on top of you and you know you're backing away, and some people aren't sensitive. Another thing that people aren't sensitive to, this is getting a little bit off the subject, but that has a very negative response from other people. Can I borrow your glasses for a minute? I'll give them right back, thank you. Is when someone looks over the edge of their glasses at you like this, you know? How does that make you feel? See, like you're being looked down upon or critiqued. Thank you. Very often people with bifocals do this as a way of seeing. But again, it makes people feel they're being scrutinized and closely looked at. So if we could just kind of be conscious of that, we might get forth a more positive response. You see, the point of this nonverbal communication is stress is cyclical. And what I send out to you in my body language, you reflect right back to me like a mirror, usually, most of the time. So if I can be relaxed, if my voice can be relaxed, if I don't talk real quickly and make you all nervous, then we can have a positive, relaxed communication. Of course, there are times when we might not want this to occur. It might be our day off. It might be Saturday and we're at home and we're resting, and the doorbell rings and it's someone selling a product that we don't want to buy. Well, in that case, I might button my jacket, you know, and put my arms across my chest. And
in other words, it can be really used as an effective way of saying to
Right.
people without being impolite that
Without
this is
being-
how I feel about
right,
this.
it'll get the message across.
I think we should move on to the other points that are also very helpful.
Okay, T is for touch or take notes. Touching can be a great stress reliever. It can also be a stress inducer. Some people like to be touched and some don't. When you touch someone, just look for their response. You can reassure someone by touching them, it's going to be okay. Or you can interrupt someone when they're talking by touching them. When someone's talking, if you'll just touch them like this and look in their eyes for a minute, their lips will close kind of like a Barbie doll for a second. And you can interrupt verbally without being rude. So that can show your interest and relieve stress. Another thing is you might want to take notes in certain situations, and it can make a person feel that you're interested. However, make sure when you take notes that they're relevant to the conversation. You know, if you're making out a grocery list or saying, remind to call Jim about car, you know, and they see that, they're not going to feel too good. And I would try to not let people ever see you doodle. Makes them feel that you're disinterested in the conversation. So we have S for smile, O for open posture, F for forward lean, T for touch or take notes, and E is for eye contact. There's two things people don't usually like about eye contact, and that's staring and being shifty-eyed. And when we stare at someone, usually for a prolonged period of time, the person feels very uncomfortable and intimidated. Now, in some current bestsellers on success, staring is advocated as a method of winning over your opponent. But I don't like to think of other people as my opponents in life, and I'd like them to feel that they're winning too. So why not use an eye contact technique that will make them feel comfortable? What makes people feel comfortable is if you look into their eyes, make eye contact for a brief moment or two, and then let your eyes roam over the lower part of their face, and then look at something that you're holding in your hands, such as a glass or a pencil, and then kind of repeat that again. Now, occasionally you might want to look off while you're pondering something, and that's fine, but that will avoid you staring or being shifty-eyed. Another thing with your eyes that shows interest is the size of your pupil. My pupils are probably pretty dilated right now with the brightness of light in the room. But the size of your pupil is also determined by how interested you are in what you are looking at. The more interested you are, the bigger they get. And you probably think, wow, how can I make my pupils get large? You know, I've got all these other things to think about. concentrate on what you like about the other person you're talking to, and your IQs will follow. And finally, N stands for nod. Nod your head affirmatively when you're talking to someone, and tilt your head slightly. And you might want to bring your hand to your face in an evaluation gesture. By the way, make sure when you do this evaluation gesture that you have a pleasant expression on your face. If you kind of go like this, it turns into a critical evaluation and makes other people uncomfortable. And if you put your hands over your mouth, it makes people feel that you're concealing something. And you might want to combine that with a little bit of verbal, nonverbal communication, such as, oh, that's interesting. And that's the soften technique.
Janelle Burke.
Do men and women have different ways of gesturing which mean different things?
Yes, because of our physique, there's men cross their hands much higher on the chest, for instance, than women do, and different ways of leg crossing. It's a whole science, and it varies from culture to culture, too. What I've kind of been sharing with you are ideas that would apply to our culture here in the United States.
I've also been dying to ask you about the premonition. You know, sometimes we talk to someone and we just have the feeling that they don't like us, or that they're plotting against us, or perhaps we have the opposite reaction, that they like us very much, or there's sort of a little message there that goes on between me and thee, and we understand each other. What about this premonition? That first impulse or that first impression?
Well, Janelle, you're very intuitive about body language. We all are. You don't have to have taken a course in it. We've been using it before we could talk. You see, nonverbal communication was our first way of understanding life. And I know that feeling. When you know someone just doesn't like you, you're not going to hit it off. And it's something that they've done with their mannerisms. And it's a right hemisphere process. It has to do with feelings, so we're all very conversant with it.
Lou Reed.
Barbie, how do you think we can teach children to understand and cope with stress? The whole question of competition and of winning and pressures. Do you have any particular advice to parents
Yes, I
about
do.
competition?
I think the best way for anyone to learn anything is by example. And I know if I was just really uptight and chewing gum right now, you know, going like this, I wouldn't be a very good example of sort of what I'm talking about. And I think with children, if we want them to incorporate these positive things into their life, we need to start doing them ourselves.
And are children, to your mind, more sensitive to nonverbal communication?
Right. And speaking of a positive way to cope with stress, children are very, very easy to teach meditation to because they're more into the feeling process. They aren't as analytical. Much more difficult to teach to adults because we want to know how it works and why it does what it does in the latest research at Harvard. Children don't care about that. They just want to experience it. It's fun. Woo, I want to try it.
When you're talking about teaching by example, do you feel that parents and we as a culture try to verbalize too much and that we are not consistent enough in what we're saying, and that we should talk less to our children and do more with them?
Right. You know, it's been brought up again and again, for instance, about how parents have been anti-drugs, especially marijuana, and yet, you know, they come home every night and have 2 or 3 martinis or whatever. And you see, the problem is there is an ambiguity often between our verbal and our nonverbal communication. We say one thing, but we do another, and the nonverbal communication is what most of us tend to believe. It's like the executive who says to his subordinate, "Oh, sure, John, sure, I got plenty of time to talk to you," and he's packing his briefcase and looking at his watch. Or the parent who says, "I want it quiet around this house." And the child thinks, well, if he wants it, he just continues to be noisy, because what has the parent said? So when the parent says, you know, "Why don't you relax and not be so tense about school?" He kind of shouts at him or shakes him. Relax. I just, you know, as he's drinking his margarita or whatever, I just hope you don't hang around with kids that are, you know, getting into drugs. And he's kind of, you know, starting to lose his diction himself.
Joe Webb.
Barbie, it was also mentioned that you are interested in time management, and I wonder how we can use that to reduce stress.
Well, time is one of our most valuable resources, Joe, and I feel that when we waste our time, we waste our life, and when we master our time, we master our life. Time is irreversible and it's irreplaceable. And one of the problems that causes us stress is we just don't manage our time wisely. And there's some excellent courses. The book that we mentioned, How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life by Alan Lake, and that has some techniques that we can use. If someone says to me, I don't have time to meditate 15 or 20 minutes today and they're in my stress management course, I say, take my time management course and I'll show you how to find that 20 minutes and more. Because you see, we all have 24 hours a day. Einstein did, Rockefeller did, President Carter did. All of us here in this room have 24 hours a day. It's how we use it and manage it that's important.
Janelle Burke.
Does our body territory change as we are feeling more or less secure within ourselves?
Right. Our body language, our nonverbal communication changes from situation to situation, and as we move through different experiences in our life, our body language, I'll tell you when I think it's the most honest, and I work with this in my dreams and sleep workshops, is when we go to sleep. You know, our nonverbal communication doesn't stop when we go to sleep. In fact, because our left hemisphere, you might say, our rational thinking process is kind of closed down to a lesser degree of expression, and our right hemisphere takes over, we're probably much more honest in our body language. And the way we sleep at night, our sleep positions, there's a book out called Sleep Positions by Dr. Samuel Dunkel, can tell some very interesting things about not only the way we feel about our daytime life, but how we feel about the person we're sleeping with. Again, environment, though, has a lot to do with it. If it's, you know, if you're backpacking up in the Canadian Rockies and you're sleeping in the full fetal position, it's just, you know, you don't have the right sleeping bag. It's just because it's too cold. So again, we have to take these factors into consideration.
With that, I must bring our program to conclusion. Barbie, again, the clock has called us and won. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program. It's been a pleasure having as our guest Barbie Ide for the past 2 weeks, discussing the cause of the tension and then how to cope with it. I hope the program has been helpful to you. May I invite you to be with us again next week when again we'll be discussing what we believe is an important issue of our time. I am Tony Stewart. Have a good week.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.